These conference tiebreakers are ridiculously confusing, and therefore they're ridiculous. When they're ridiculous confusing, it makes them ridiculous. There's 2 weeks left in the regular season, and there's only 2 teams that have secured their spot in the conference championship game. Army and Tulane. They're playing in the AAC championship. We'll figure out who gets the home field. Green Wave hosts Memphis on the 28th of November. So we'll find out who's hosting there. And then Army hosts UTSA on Saturday, November 30th. That'll be at noon Eastern. So we only know 2 teams. The other areas are almost impossible to figure out. The ACC is probably the easiest at the moment. SMU is undefeated. They went out. They're in. Clemson and Miami both have 1 loss in the conference. Clemson has completed ACC play. They have the Citadel this week, I believe, and then South Carolina in the final week of the season, neither of which will factor in to whether or not Clemson makes the ACC title game. So if Miami can beat Wake Forest and then go on the road and beat Syracuse, they'll be in. They'll play SMU, assuming SMU wins one of the next 2. Got it? Pretty simple when you take everything else into account. In a case if it's a 3-way tie, it becomes very complex. I'll explain it next week. But I think SMU is a heavy favorite down the stretch. I think they should be in pretty good shape. Let's move next to the Big Ten, where it gets a little bit more interesting. Oregon, full control. They host Washington. They're 8-0 in the conference right now. They host Washington the final week of the season. It's almost a mathematical certainty that they are going to be in. All right. It's pretty simple. If Ohio State loses or Penn State loses, they're in. If they beat Washington, they're in. Like, there's a lot of things that have to happen for Oregon not to be playing in the Big Ten title game. So I think we just operate under the assumption right now that Oregon will be there. Indiana also alive. They clinch a spot with a win this weekend. All right. They beat Ohio State. They're in. Ohio State has 2 losses. Indiana then would have still 0 losses. And then if they lost the last week to Purdue, which, come on, highly unlikely, then is there a chance where they could get in? Where other teams could get in? Sure, but probably not. They win this weekend, they're basically in. If Ohio State wins this weekend, that means that Indiana can actually still get in with 1 loss, but they would need Penn State to lose one of their final 2, and they need Ohio State to lose to Michigan. All right. And then lastly, Penn State, they need to win both games, have Ohio State beat Indiana, and then Ohio State lose to Michigan. So it's basically just watch. If Ohio State wins this weekend, they're likely playing Oregon for the Big Ten championship game. Simple as that, because I don't think Ohio State's losing to Michigan, and I don't think Indiana's losing to Purdue, and I don't think Penn State's going to lose either of their final 2 games of the season. Easy enough. Perfect. The Big 12. Do you realize that there are 9 teams that are still alive with 2 weeks left in the regular season? It's just unbelievable. 9 teams in the Big 12 that are alive. Now, BYU and Colorado, they're both 6-1 in the conference. They have a 1-game lead over Arizona State and Iowa State. So the easiest thing to happen, the least confusing outcome, would be BYU and Colorado win out. They'll meet in Dallas for the Big 12 title game. Okay? That one's simple. BYU clinches a spot with a win this week at Arizona State and a loss by either Iowa State or Colorado. So if Colorado loses to Kansas or if Iowa State loses at Utah, then BYU is in, but they can also win. They also have to win at Arizona State to solidify that formality, right? Colorado, they clinch a playoff spot if they beat Kansas. And if Arizona State loses to BYU, and Iowa State loses to Utah. So probably not going to figure that out just yet. And then finally, Arizona State, if they win their last 2 games to finish 7-2, they're in, basically. It's like a 98% chance. So the Big 12 is so complex and so confusing that I'll try to help you out, but let's just wait till next week because a lot of the chips will fall this weekend with Arizona State in the mix against BYU, with Colorado as a slight favorite against Kansas. We're going to know a lot more next week. All right, we'll fast forward. And then finally, the Southeastern Conference. There are still 6 teams currently alive. which I've found surprising. I did not think that 6 would still be around, but then you start doing it, it makes sense. Basically, Texas and Texas A&M, if they win out, Texas plays Kentucky this week, heavy favorite. A&M plays at Auburn. A&M just a slight favorite, 2.5-point favorite at the moment. But if Texas and Texas A&M both win this week, then Texas and Texas A&M winner is in the SEC championship game. Number 1 seed, pretty simple. They get to wear home jerseys in the SEC title game. So that's exciting. Now, there is a 50% chance, slightly above 50% chance that Texas and Texas A&M winner will play Alabama in the SEC championship game. The most likely scenario is Bama against Texas if you run all the simulations and stuff like that. The second most likely scenario is Georgia and Texas. Of course, that's assuming Texas beats Texas A&M. If Texas A&M beats Texas, then they're in, and it's pretty simple. As long as they don't lose to Auburn this weekend, which, as anyone that's followed SEC football before, anybody that knows anything about Jordan-Hare in November, that's not a guarantee. Alabama, as of this moment, is the best positioned amongst the 2 lost teams because they've played the hardest conference schedule of the 6 championship game contenders. It's not quite hey, Bama wins out and they're in. It's not quite that. But if they finish 6-2 in the conference, it's highly likely that they'll be in. They're about a 2-touchdown favorite at Oklahoma this weekend, and they're a double-digit favorite at home against Auburn in the Iron Bowl. The other teams, Georgia. The good news is that they have head-to-head wins against Texas and Tennessee. The bad news is they have losses to Ole Miss and Alabama, which could quickly knock them out of the tiebreaker at 6-2. And then for Ole Miss, the best case for them to find a way in is to finish second at 6-2, have chaos pretty much everywhere, and they're tied with Georgia at 6-2, and they have the head-to-head against Georgia. So basically, percentage chances are Texas has like a 90 or a 75% chance to be there. Alabama has around a 70% chance to be there, assuming they win their final 2 games. Georgia has about a 40% chance to be there, and everybody else has pretty slim chance, but possible. So, like I said, super, super confusing. We will do a deeper dive on this next week when things are a little bit more clear, and it's really 1-game seasons that will decide the outcomes and the fates of many of these teams.